Welcome back, everybody. Today we'll be discussing Niccolo Machiavelli, who was an Italian philosopher and political thinker. It's a lot of fun to read Machiavelli. I hope you enjoyed reading him. He is quite a mischievous character. Actually, in English, we have the phrase Machiavellian tactics because of Machiavelli. He is sort of known as a teacher of evil. I've known many politicians, even here in the United States, and other political operatives who help politicians who carry around a copy of Machiavelli's The Prince. It's the trick of dirty little secrets for politics. And so he's extremely important and somebody we need to read very carefully. Now, Machiavelli lived in Florence, Italy, from 1479 to 1527. He wrote The Prince as a document, he said that it contained everything he knew and that he was giving it to a prince, and it was a gift for him. It was published posthumously after his death, and he became infamous for writing this afterwards. Now, I think it might be best to just simply begin with the text, and I'll give you some more details here, but you always have to read Machiavelli very carefully. He is a very sneaky fox, and I think he deserves taking the time to read very carefully. So we'll begin with chapter 15, of those things for which men, and especially princes, are praised or blamed. And I'll just read from the very beginning. If you don't mind, make sure to have your printout or look at the PDF that I sent you of Machiavelli. He says, "It remains now to see what the modes in government of a prince should be with subjects and with friends. And because I know that many have written of this, I fear that in writing of it again, I may be held presumptuous, especially since in disputing this matter, I depart from the orders of others." So here we could say that maybe Machiavelli is thinking of Christine de Pizan and how she and others have written about how princes and how principalities need to be governed. But he is going to be seen presumptuous, but he's going to depart from everybody. And here we really have a radical break with ancient and medieval thought. Machiavelli inaugurates a new way of thinking, something that will be influential as we continue to read modern thinkers. And here I continue reading. "But since my intent is to write something useful to whoever understands it," so he's writing this to a prince, but who may not understand, but he's going to write something useful that other people will read later on, "it has appeared to me more fitting to go directly to the effectual truth of the thing than to the imagination of it." What is the effectual truth as opposed to the imagination of it? The effectual truth is that human beings are live this type of way of life, not the idealized life of the philosophers. But this effectual truth is a very important phrase for Machiavelli. And he says, "Many have imagined republics and principalities that have never been seen or known to exist in truth. For it is so far from how one lives to how one should live, that he who lets go of what is done for what should be done learns his ruin rather than his preservation." This is a very famous phrase. So Christine de Pizan, Aquinas, Plato, all of these people, Aristotle, all of these ancient and medieval thinkers have talked about principalities that have never really existed, of heaven, the city, the heavenly city. They talk about how men ought to be. The problem is that men are not that way. And what ends up happening is that by trying to live a life according to the saintly and virtuous life, we end up leading to ruin as opposed to preservation. So Machiavelli is going to give us this new teaching about how human beings really are. And here we go again. "For a man who wants to make a profession of good in all regards, must come to ruin among so many who are not good." So if you want to try to live virtuously, if you want to do the right thing, you're going to come to ruin because there are so many other people who are not good. So you better have a gun on you, because anybody else could have a gun and could come kill you. And so you have to be ready to fight no matter what. You can't hope that being peaceful and virtuous will save you. He says, "Hence it is necessary to a prince that he wants to maintain himself to learn to be able not to be good, and to use this and not use it according to necessity. That is a radical departure from Christine de Pizan, who says that the prince needs to learn how to differentiate between good and bad and do the good. But Machiavelli actually says the prince needs to learn to be able not to be good. It's difficult sometimes not to be good, to learn how not to be good, how to do the bad things sometimes. Sometimes it comes naturally, as Machiavelli will show us, but other times you have to really be willing to do the ugly necessities, as Machiavelli will say, in order to really achieve something worthwhile. He says, thus leaving out what is imagined about a prince and discussing what is true, right? So what Christine de Pizan is just imagination. It's not what is truly true. And so we have to leave that behind. He's going to look at the qualities that people are either praised or blamed. And he gives many examples. So some people can be a breaker of faith. You could be impious or pious. You can be humane or inhumane. You can be chaste or unchaste. These are all these different virtues, good or bad. And he says, this is on page 62, and I know that everyone will confess that it would be a very praiseworthy thing to find in a prince all of the above mentioned qualities that are held to be good. So to be virtuous, to have the cardinal virtues, it would be nice to do that. But because he cannot have them, nor wholly observe them, since human conditions do not permit it. This is very interesting. So he's basically saying that human beings cannot be this way. To have all the virtues isn't possible. We're human, we sin. And Christine de Pizan says, no, that's no excuse. But Machiavelli says, no, this is excuse. Human beings cannot truly be virtuous all the time. He says, it is necessary for him to be so prudent as to know how to avoid the infamy of those vices that would take his state from him, and to be on a guard against those that do not, if that is possible. So you shouldn't try to avoid doing wrong. You should avoid the infamy of doing wrong. But if one cannot, one can let them go on with less hesitation. And furthermore, one should not care about incurring the fame of those vices, without which it is difficult to save one's state. So sometimes you need vices to save a state. For if one considers everything well, one will find something appears to be a virtue, which if pursued would be one's ruin. So if you think holding on to treaties or doing the right thing or doing what you said you would do is the right thing to do, it actually could end up being the downfall of your government and of your kingship. And so you shouldn't actually do it. Sometimes vice, breaking oaths, breaking different agreements is actually the right thing to do for you and for your people. And something else appears to be vice, which if pursued results in one's security and well-being. So sometimes pursuing vice can actually save your country. And I'll just read the first sentence of chapter 16. Beginning then with the first of the above mentioned qualities, I say that it would be good to be held liberal, right? To be merciful, to give money out to other human beings and to help your people. Nonetheless, liberality when used so that you can be held liberal hurts you. This is one of Machiavelli's famous and favorite words. Nonetheless, but nevertheless, even though people say this, actually it's the opposite. In this case, you don't actually want to be liberal, because if you give out all your money to people, you'll be poor, right? You want to appear to be liberal, but you don't actually want to be liberal, to be altruistic and give out lots of money. Now moving to chapter 17, of cruelty and mercy, and whether it is better to be loved than feared, or the contrary. I think in an episode of The Office, they talk about this, whether it's better to be loved or feared. And Machiavelli sort of is playful with this. Now, I just want to mention one thing in this title, whether it is better to be loved than feared, or on the contrary. You have to think about it. Who is the only person in human history who has been both loved and feared? It's Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is one of the only people that has been truly loved and feared. And in some ways, for Christine de Pizan, Jesus Christ is the example. You should try to be both loved and feared in a good way, but truly be loved, and not love is the pinnacle of it. But Machiavelli says the opposite. He doesn't use Christ as the example. So let me read from the very beginning of this chapter. Descending next to the other qualities cited before, I say that each prince should desire to be held merciful and not cruel. And then here we go, Machiavelli's favorite word. Nonetheless, he should take care not to use this mercy badly, right? You can use mercy, you can use virtue badly. If you're too merciful, you can end up leading to ruin. And he says, Cesare Borgia was held to be cruel. Nonetheless, his cruelty restored Romagna, united it, and reduced it to peace and to faith. Who is Cesare Borgia? Cesare Borgia was a bastard son of a pope. And we'll see who this pope is here in a second. But Cesare Borgia was known for being cruel, and yet he's the only one that could really establish peace and tranquility. So sometimes you can't be afraid of having the infamy of vice and being cruel. Sometimes being cruel to certain human beings is actually much more humane. It's kind of paradoxical. And here he's going to explain. If one considers this well, the one will see that he was much more merciful than the Florentine people, who, so as to escape a name for cruelty, allowed Pistoia to be destroyed. So because the people are not willing to be cruel, they allow chaos to take place. A prince or somebody who's in charge of a region must be willing to use force or use cruelty in order to establish peace and stability. Sometimes I think about this with Mexico and the drug cartels. And actually in Mexico, the death penalty is illegal. And part of that is because of Catholicism. The idea some Catholics have that death penalty should be illegal. Now other people say, well, this being so merciful allows these drug cartels to continue on. And really what they should do is they should get these leaders and imprison them and execute them immediately. And if they were to be more cruel in these certain circumstances, actually they would be much more humane and there would be less chaos and disorder in the country. So I think that's kind of a contemporary example. Whether or not that would be the appropriate thing to do in Mexico's cases is something I'll leave to the side. But that's just an example of what Machiavelli might suggest. And I'll read on page 66, in the middle of the page. From this, a dispute arises whether it is better to be loved than feared, or the reverse. The response is that one would want to be both the one and the other. So actually it would be good to be both loved and feared. But because it is difficult to put them together, it is much safer to be feared than loved if one has to lack one of the two. And because human beings are the way they are, you can't be both, really. You have to be feared. For one can say this generally of men. This is Machiavelli's general maxim about human beings, that they are ungrateful, fickle, pretenders, dissemblers, evaders of danger, eager for gain. Some of you might see this with other human beings. You're very cynical. And Machiavelli is very cynical here. That generally they only care about what you give them, but they don't really actually care about you. Maybe sometimes with your friends you feel this way. And let's read at the bottom of the page here, the last sentence here. And men have less hesitation to offend one who makes himself loved than one who makes himself feared. For love is held by a chain of obligation, which, because men are wicked, is broken at every opportunity for their own utility. For fear is held by a dread of punishment that never forsakes you. So you think about this, you can think about this within Christianity in some ways, that maybe you'll do the right thing because you love God. In some ways it's a duty to do it. But what will sometimes make you actually do the right thing, it's the dread of hell or something like this. And same with children, when you're raising children, are they going to do the right thing because they love you and they want to do it? Sometimes they'll do it, but sometimes you need to be willing to say that you'll punish them and they won't get something. And sometimes that can be a stronger motivation. And so Machiavelli is saying, we're all like this. Sometimes the punishment will be what keeps us in check as opposed to the reward. Now Machiavelli on page 67 says there are two things that a prince should withhold from doing. He should be feared, but he shouldn't take away these things from human beings. He shouldn't take away their property and their women. These are the two most important things. And Machiavelli says that they'll forget the death of a father more quickly than the loss of their property and of their women. And so a prince should be careful and not take these things away. Now let's go to chapter 18 and we'll end here. This is a very complex chapter, but very important. Again, we'll read the very first sentence and you'll see how he completely turns around the ordinary notion of virtue. Virtue is redefined. Virtue does not mean doing the right thing. It means being able to preserve yourself. Self-preservation becomes the primary maxim, and we'll see this with other modern thinkers. Now, let me just read from the bottom of 68, the very first chapter, the chapter 18. In what mode faith should be kept by princes? This is the question. How praiseworthy it is for a prince to keep his faith and to live with honesty and not by astuteness. Everyone understands, right? So everybody knows that it would be great if a prince could be faithful. And then here we go, Machiavelli's favorite word, nonetheless. One sees by experience in our times that the princes who have done great things are those who have taken little account of faith and have known how to get around men's brains with their astuteness, right? The example of the past and of our time shows us that the princes that have had the most success are the ones that have had taken little account of faith, right? Don't worry about, you have to be seen as being faithful, but don't actually care about religion. So again, the exact opposite of what Christine de Pizan teaches in her book. And I'll read here, continue reading on page 69, the first full paragraph. Thus, you must know that there are two kinds of combat, one with laws, the other with force. The first is proper to man, the second to beast. But because the first is often not enough, one must have recourse to the second. Therefore, it is necessary for a prince to know well how to use the beast and the man. Man is not both human and divine like Jesus Christ. Man is like man and beast. There's a beastly part of man and a more human part of man. The human can go by laws, but the beasts need force and force to keep them in check. And I'll keep reading. This role was taught covertly to princes by ancient writers. So in Plato's Republic, there's a discussion of injustice by in the name of somebody. And so I think Machiavelli is pointing to this, that it's taught covertly. Plato understood this, but he taught it covertly. And then who wrote that Achilles and many other ancient princes were given to Chiron, the censor, to be raised so that he would look after them with his discipline. To have a teacher, a half beast, half man, means nothing other than that a prince needs to know how to use both natures. Now, again, remember Christine de Pizan teaches that you need a faithful tutor, somebody with good morals. That's what it means, somebody that's like God, like Christ. But who does Machiavelli tell us to be like? Chiron. He's a half man, half beast, and this is the person that raises Achilles. If anybody's watched the Disney cartoon about Hercules, you'll remember that his trainer had the body of a horse and the torso of a human being, and that he helped educate and tutor Achilles. And so this is what Machiavelli is saying, that you need somebody that has to be willing to be cunning and wicked. And the example of Chiron, half man, half beast, that is the exact opposite of who? Of Jesus Christ, who is half man, so to speak, half God. But Chiron is half beast, half man. So Machiavelli gives us what you could say the exact opposite of kind of a devilish Luciferian teaching here. Now, he has a very famous example about foxes that I want to read here, continuing on in the next paragraph. So one needs to be a fox to recognize snares and a lion to fight the wolves. So you have to be strong and forceful, but you also have to be cunning like a fox in order to see these traps and to do what you might call preemptive war. Some people said that George Bush, when he went to attack Iraq, was like Machiavelli because he was talking about these weapons of mass destruction and needed to use preemptive strikes on them to take them out before they could take them. So this is kind of the example that Machiavelli is giving here. He says, therefore, a prudent lord cannot observe faith, nor should he when he observes, when such observance turns against him, and the causes that made him promise have been eliminated. And if all men were good, his teaching would not be good. But because they are wicked and do not observe faith with you, you also do not have to observe it with them. So even though you make a promise to an enemy or something like this, and you say you'll do the right thing, you don't have to observe it because they're not going to observe it. That's just the way humans are. Even though you make a promise, they're going to go against the promise, and so you should be aware of that and act accordingly. Now on page 70, and we're almost done here. This is the first full paragraph. He says, I do not want to be silent about one of the recent examples. Who is this recent example? Alexander the Sixth never did anything, nor ever thought of anything, but how to deceive men. And he always found a subject to whom he could do it. And there never was a man with greater efficacy in asserting a thing, in affirming it with greater oaths, who observed it less. Nonetheless, his deceit succeeded at his will, because he well knew this aspect of the world. Now the question is, who is Alexander the Sixth? Does anybody know who Alexander the Sixth is? Alexander the Sixth was a pope, known for having many mistresses and having many children. And who was his son? Well, his bastard son was Cesare Borgia. And he was always concerned about helping his bastard son. So here we see Machiavelli being very playful, right? Who is the example of somebody who seems to be pious, but really is not? Doesn't take any regard for faith at all? It's the Pope. It's Alexander the Sixth, Cesare Borgia's father. The Borgia, this is a very bad time for the church, and Cesare Borgia and Alexander the Sixth are sort of infamous for this corruption at this time. Now, just to continue reading here. Thus, it is not necessary for a prince to have all the above mentioned qualities. In fact, but it is indeed necessary to appear to have them, right? Like the Pope, you have to appear pious, but not actually be. Nay, I dare say this, that by having them and always observing them, they are harmful. And by appearing to have them, they are useful. You should appear to be a certain virtuous, as it is to appear. So here are the virtues: merciful, faithful, humane, honest, and religious. And to be so. But he says, but to remain with a spirit built so that if you need not to do these things, you're able to know how to change to the contrary. So it's good to have these virtues, but use them sparingly. Don't be too faithful. Don't be too honest. Don't be too humane. Don't be too merciful. You have to learn how not to be good. And here at the bottom of that paragraph. And so he needs to have a spirit disposed to change as the winds of fortune and variations of things command him. So you have to be very malleable, moving and changing at all times. And as I said above, not depart from good, right? So you should do some good, some virtuous things in order to appear and to actually be, to a certain extent, when possible. But know how to enter into evil when forced by necessity. Necessity forces us to enter into evil. A prince needs to understand this and be willing to get his hands dirty in order to maintain his principality. And this is the very last sentence here, and we'll go to the next page. And nothing is more necessary to appear to have than this last quality, that is religion. Men in general judge more by their eyes than by their hands, because seeing is given to everyone, touching to few. Everyone sees how you appear, but few touch what you are. Amazing. Appear to be a certain way, don't actually be it. This is a very, you could say, corrupting teaching. So we can maybe say that Machiavelli is guilty of impiety and of corrupting the youth. He's saying, don't actually be all these virtues that Christine de Pizan and others are saying that you should be. And here, just to skip a little bit. So let a prince win and maintain a state. The means will always be judged honorable and will be praised by everyone, right? So the end determines the means. Whether if you have success, they will praise you. If you don't have success, they won't praise you. So it doesn't matter how you arrive at that end. The means will always be judged honorable and will be praised by everyone. For the vulgar are taken in by the appearance and the outcome of a thing, and in the world there is no one but the vulgar. Very, very harsh teaching here. The few have a place there when the many have somewhere to lean on. A certain prince of present times, who it is not well to name, never preaches anything but peace and faith, and is very hostile to both. Right? Again, appear to be a certain way, but don't actually be it. Now, that concludes our discussion of Machiavelli, but I want to leave you with one last question and one sort of thought. Is Machiavelli a teacher of evil? Is he a bad human being for teaching these things? Or is modern politics, is America even, built upon some of these teaching that Machiavelli gives. Sometimes you have to be willing to get your hands dirty, to do bad things, to send your military somewhere, to do espionage, to do these different types of things in order to maintain the safety of your own people, to preserve yourself. Or is Machiavelli a teacher of evil? What he teaches, is it wrong? Does it go against religion? These are all questions that you should think about. And with that, I'll leave you.